side carpet and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when the last massage parlor finally left about 10 years ago.
Yeah. Did you grow up?
No, I grew up outside Philadelphia and then in Iowa and moved to Minnesota for college. Small town south of Des Moines.
Probably.
That sounds familiar. It wasn't that one, but it was pretty close.
I have a friend that moved to Iowa City a decade ago, and I just in awe driving down the river road and visiting. So not so much. How about the place I want to get to is the Grotto of the Redemption, West Bend, Fort Dodge.
Never been there.
How about the low skill? It's the one that's very representative.
I mean, I left, you know, when I was 18 and probably places I would have explored as an adult, but not as a kid.
You and me both.
Yeah, my last visit with the Tubman was the Hoover Library outside of West.
Yeah, it's
Philtown.
West Branch. I went there with my friend and Hoover left Iowa when he was about 11. And I said, so what's the connection here? And he said, remember John, Hoover was a conservative man in West Branch, Iowa. Is considerably cheaper than in Southern California. Made his mark in Stanford.
Are you all coming from the 10 o'clock service? Or starting late today?
No, we just saw the form and that you were presenting on that interest in the subject. So, you know, rather than worshiping at the cathedral on the Sunday New York Times, I thought I would come and did it in person live.
Geez, I remember when that tornado came through, you know, the year when it took out all the big trees, especially South Bend.
Did it take
Yeah.
out trees in Whittier too? I suppose it did.
Oh, yeah, I just went to high school south because it was just so devastating.
Well, yeah, that they carried the rest of us trees like
Yeah.
that.
And you
That's
said
true,
big
that would be,
tree.
huh?
There was such a big,
Oh.
remember how they just, they put it
Yes,
over
they
the
did a
street?
canopy over
Yeah,
the,
canopy.
over the street, exactly.
That was the one that, the tornado that was like 15 years ago or so?
Oh,
Yeah.
more than that.
More than that,
Yeah, I think it was, gosh, what year was it? Maybe in the 1980s.
Yeah, I'm guessing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a different one. There was one I remember, yeah, it took out a lot of trees in the central neighborhood, so like around 4th and 5th. Yeah. Yeah, and still, when you go through that area, it feels kind of barren. You know, it doesn't feel friendly.
Yeah, the King one, my grandma, I call my grandma, she was kind of an adopted grandmother, lived at 31st and Nicolay in great building. And when it was an old person's place, it was so safe and so sweet and so wonderful. And then it became something else, and it was pretty dangerous for the little lady pretty much to come home.
The 3 brick buildings, is it still
Yeah,
there?
they're
The Horn
actually, I'm
Towers?
trying to find where else I look at this work. They were built before C. They're 20-story, 15, 20.
Oh, yeah, Horn Towers is the only
Horn
thing.
Towers,
Yeah,
that's
I think
right.
that's all.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize that that was senior housing originally.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was just such a stitch to go there, and they loved it. It
noticed it that much either.
Is the big building the search?
Yeah.
Okay, so, yeah, I'd be down here somewhere where that three brick building is called building.
Yeah, because this is towards Longfellow, that's north. So, yeah. And, yeah, my office is inside.
Oh. Cool. Yeah, I haven't been inside the city building in many years. It's still a mix of wonderful,
Yeah, there's been a lot of turnover, particularly with the pandemic. So a lot of businesses left, and then all these closed back down.
I think I got the best spring rolls I ever ate. It's unbelievable. Such a delicacy to find, hard to get to it.
Yeah.
We'll be wandering in, so I guess we might as well, I'll introduce.
Okay.
Especially since we're always wandering late, and now today more than ever, they'll be wandering in late. Good morning. It's 10 o'clock. People will be wandering in, I'm sure, but we'll get started. So my name is Myra. I'm on the Sunday Forum Committee. And Jackie Prince recruited our speaker today, and then she skipped town, so I get to introduce Allison Sharkey with the Lake Street Recovery. It's a progress report she's going to give us today. And they have made incredible progress in rebuilding from the 2020 troubles and destruction in the wake of George Floyd's murder. But the work is not finished. By the way, did you notice we have a sign in the parking lot? George Floyd Square, 2.8 miles.
Well, that's great.
Yeah, I should have pointed that out to you. Anyway, the work is not finished. We will hear about the achievements and the remaining challenges of the Lake Street rebuild. Allison Sharkey has worked in economic and community development in the Twin Cities since 2006 and has served as executive director of the Lake Street Council since 2014. So, it's all yours.
Thank you, Myra, and thank you all for being here an hour early today. I appreciate it. I am the executive director of an organization called the Lake Street Council, and we've been around since 1968 when the organization started as the Businessmen's Club, back when Lake Street had kind of evolved from the horse and buggy era into the era of auto dealerships. And at the time, back in the 60s, suburbanization was starting to happen. Those auto dealerships were starting to move to the suburbs along with a lot of the commerce. And the entrepreneurs on the corridor came together to support each other and try to figure out Lake Street's future. And so we have a tradition of change, of welcoming new people, particularly recent immigrants. And so Lake Street's story is really the story of pursuit of the American dream and the story of change and recovery and transition and success. So I've got a few slides here. I can walk through a little bit around what we experienced in 2020 as a recap, how the community came together and responded, and what we've done well, what we're struggling with, and what the next couple years is looking like. I also want to give a big welcome to Mr. Steve Wellington over here, who has been a really instrumental partner in rebuilding Lake Street. And Wellington Management was one of the first and most important partners to, well, first of all, they experienced more loss than anyone else. And was really one of the first and most important firms and families to say, of course we're not going anywhere. We're going to figure this out, and we're coming back, and we're staying in this neighborhood. And not only did they rebuild, but really doubled down on their commitment to providing space for local entrepreneurs of color, balanced with bringing in national tenants who could bring that traffic to help support local businesses. So they have a really impressive model and commitment. And so, Steve, you've done more than me here, so please jump in at any point. So we made a quick little video that I want to show you. It's about 3 minutes. It's a little edgy, it's kind of fun, and just a music video which has been part of our PR work to communicate about the authenticity of Lake Street.
It's all about the 6, 1, 2. Hailing from the south side, do it for the north side too. What you know about Lake Street, Midtown Zoo, Freedom Boulevard, Revolution Avenue. We from the 6, 1, 2. Uncle playing ball with the kids on their day off from school. Better open up the curtains, let the sun shine through. Blessings to the elders, giving wisdom to the youth. I was on the 21, wasn't even 21. Nothing in my pocket but some quarters and a honey bun. Kickstart the single speed, me soaking in the sun. Too much fun is never enough. Lake Street, I ain't making no plans, I see where the night takes me. Serenity be my tour guide, embrace me. May we get banking and make it a lot. Stage to the block, we've been way out the box. 2 times if you riding down Lake Street, and 1 time if you rolling through the 612. Been in the crib all week, got me angsty. Friday night, only question what we gon' do. It's all about the 6, 1, 2. Hailing from the south side, do it for the north side too. What you know about Lake Street, Midtown Zoo, Freedom Boulevard, Revolution Avenue. We from the 6, 1, 2. Uncle playing ball with the kids on their day off from school. Better open up the curtains, let the sun shine through. Blessings to the elders, giving wisdom to the youth. I was on the 18, face resembled the babies on the way to get some Los Capos hopping off on Lake Street. 13 years later in bed, I'm doing the same thing. Same neighborhood, same dream with the same team. The posse from the barrio, pasta from Somalia. The whip it came from Cottage Grove, flexing in my Adidas. Music, you know how it goes, we make you move your body up. The culture's influence, take a look around, it's obvious. My faith is in the people, never in those in power. Changes from the streets, we can make those in an hour. Living color beauty on the block's gonna show it. The smiles on everybody's face, cause they know it. It's all about the 6, 1, 2. Hailing from the south side, do it for the north side too. What you know about Lake Street, Midtown Zoo, Freedom Boulevard, Revolution Avenue. We from the 6, 1, 2. Uncle playing ball with the kids on their day off from school. Better open up the curtains, let the sun shine through. Blessings to the elders, giving wisdom to the youth. And even when the sun goes down, the light is on my soul, it'll never go out. Flying through the summer, gonna brush those clouds. The birds by my window, yeah, I love those sounds. And even when the sun goes down, the light is on my soul, it'll never go out. Flying through the summer, gonna brush those clouds. The birds by my window, yeah, I love those sounds.
Oops, no, we don't need to see that again. Although it was fun.
I would watch it again.
All right. Okay, there we go. Okay, so let me first give you a little summary, just a little recap of what we experienced in 2020. Excuse me. So the uprising resulted in over $250 million in damages, particularly along Lake Street, University Avenue, and West Broadway on the north side, and expanded out onto commercial corridors all over the place. This was the second costliest civil disturbance in US history. There was damage to over 500 businesses on Lake Street, most of which were owned by entrepreneurs of color, and nearly all of the 500 that were damaged have been able to reopen, except for those that were located in buildings that were completely demolished. There were immediate ways in which people came together, and I'm sure many of you, well, I know, looking around, I know a bunch of you have been, deeply involved, but many other people, 65,000 ended up donating to the We Love Lake Street Fund, which is a fund that the Lake Street Council kind of propped up very quickly. We threw up a website to raise money, and people around the world heard about it and were moved and contributed over $12 million. And then in addition to the people that just flooded into the streets with brooms, asking how they could help, sort of coming up with new ways of providing food, shelter, everything that was needed. Everyone was really kind of building the plane as they were flying it. So the We Love Lake Street Fund, as I said, raised over $12 million. And when that happened, that all came to the Lake Street Council. And we were a 4-person, $500,000 organization. And we knew that we needed additional support and that we were entrusted with this responsibility to really care for the whole entrepreneur community, and that this wasn't something we were going to be able to do ourselves. And so we convened several other organizations that had all historically been focused on supporting and growing the entrepreneur community of Lake Street. And the first thing that we did was establish a set of values quickly around not only how to invest those funds, but what were important priorities in the rebuilding of this community. And those values included, first, the ability to bring back as many of the entrepreneurs that had closed as possible. Second key value was to keep as much destroyed local property in local hands. There was a really big fear about a quick sell-off of land. People thought, owners are going to be overwhelmed, they're going to put their land on the market, and we had no idea who then would step in to buy those properties, because there'd been some history of investment firms from out of state, for example, purchasing property. And not that people didn't welcome some outside investment, there was a real fear of overall pricing skyrocketing quickly, pricing out people who were renting on the street. And so that was a really large fear. And I'm really proud to say that not a single one of those properties has left local hands. There have been some transitions of property where people looked at it and said, I'm not, I'm an entrepreneur. I bought my first, little building, but I'm just not ready to rebuild a multi-story building and take on a lot of debt. So a few people have sold their properties, but in each case, we were able to work with that seller and kind of a pipeline of local buyers to keep that property in local hands. Often it was a nonprofit or the local Holy Trinity Church, for example, that purchased that property working in partnership with entrepreneurs on a plan for the future. And then the third value that was really articulated was an interest in ensuring increased opportunity for entrepreneurs of color, especially Black entrepreneurs, to be able to move into positions of ownership. So where other folks decided to sell their buildings, we wanted to make sure that we were working with partners to have the tools in place to ensure that people that were interested in becoming property owners for the first time could do that. So with the We Love Lake Street Fund, the majority of those funds went out very quickly over the first month or two in the form of grants to businesses that had experienced broken windows, theft, sprinklers that had gone off and caused a lot of damage, to get those businesses back open. There was also a special fund where United Health Group donated $1 million, and some of their employees worked together with us to determine how to invest those funds. And what we decided to do together was to set up the Healthy Lake Street program, which invested in a dozen independent BIPOC-owned healthcare agencies. So dentists, optometrists, pharmacists that were working in the area and supporting their clients in Spanish, in Somali, and all of a sudden overnight, you know, all the local and the big pharmacies, clinics had to shut down temporarily. And so I have pictures here of a couple of these businesses. Seward Pharmacy, this is the owner, and this is located in the Hennepin County Service Building right at Hiawatha and Lake. He experienced really major damage and then theft of all those drugs. And twice actually over the course of a few days, and was able to reopen with a pretty significant grant through the Healthy Lake Street program. And then this one is Midtown Eye Care, and they were located at Chicago and Lake, were renting, and then their building was ultimately lost to fire. And in a really great win-win situation, they ended up moving into the Midtown Global Market, bringing their customer base to help support the global market, while the global market's customer base helps support the optometrist. So wait, let me go back to this slide. So we talked about this initial 72% that went out to get businesses just back open. 12% of the We Love Lake Street Fund went to reopen these independent healthcare businesses. And then another 12% has been dedicated to development projects and commercial property acquisition. And this is a program that we are still implementing today. So with these funds, we are able to provide pre-development support to people who lost their property and who now sit on vacant land. So with grants of $50,000 or more paired with technical advising around how to begin the process of rebuilding, how to handle that planning and financing. This is what we're utilizing to help people who are looking to rebuild but who have never done this before learn those steps and partner with the right people to try to get that done. In addition, with that fund, we've provided forgivable loans when people do need to transition those properties to somebody else. We provide the first-in funding of up to 10% of the purchase price to get that property transferred into community-minded hands. And that's, while it's not a ton of money, that would be up to $100,000 per project, by bringing that very first money to probably a very risky exploratory project, that has provided confidence to attract other lenders to the project, including local banks, the city of Minneapolis, and state funding. And then finally, we use some of that fund also to support entrepreneurs who are moving from renting to ownership for the first time. So a lot of folks experience that their property owner didn't do a lot to support them when they were trying to reopen, and folks got fed up and said, I think I can do this myself. I think I'm ready to own my own building. And so we've seen a really large increase in interest, particularly among Latino entrepreneurs who've been renting and getting a pretty raw deal for a long time and are now looking to own. So Elite Cleaner, this is over on Minnehaha Avenue, over by Moon Palace Books and the post office. Elite Cleaners, this couple were renting that property. They received pretty major damage. Historically, they were one of the first cleaners to go green in Minneapolis and get rid of a lot of the nasty cleaning chemicals. And they have been working with a really great nonprofit called Seward Redesign to purchase the property that they're in, as well as rent out space to other organizations, and are also exploring adding affordable housing on the property. So McGizzy is a native-led nonprofit that provides apprenticeship training and after-school programming for youth, particularly around supporting Native youth to prepare to get into green construction fields. They had, within months before the unrest, had purchased and completely renovated a building next to Gandhi Mahal over on 27th and Lake, and lost that building. And with support from state funding and other partners, were able to buy a new building farther down on Lake Street near Cedar, which had been Little Brothers Friends of the Elderly. And so they have been able to bring, they've been able to bring really groundbreaking green technology to their new building. I don't know if anyone here has toured it, but it runs on geothermal. It's got the latest solar panels. It's a really exciting project, and it's been an incredible amount of work for them over the last 5 years doing their second building project. But the new one is better than ever. So, as you can imagine, all of these rebuilding projects are very costly, especially with today's construction prices. They're complicated. Some of these successful projects have had up to 15 different sources of financing in their capital stack. And in most cases, it's simply not possible to make these projects work without some kind of subsidy. So the federal government considered an application from the state for federal disaster funding, and that request was denied. So there hasn't been any federal support at all dedicated directly to rebuilding. We are trying to figure out how to tap into, for example, some of the infrastructure and green building funding that's coming online at the federal level, and really kind of step up our efforts to try to bring some of that funding to our neighborhoods. But there hasn't been any direct allocation for rebuilding. The state was also slow to respond. Here's a picture of us bringing in the governor, lieutenant governor, and 4 legislators on a tour. As a result of this work and of many, many people really utilizing, their influence, there was a fairly significant bill passed 2 years ago, the Main Street Act. The Main Street Economic Revitalization Program, which did bring here, on the next page I have the numbers. It's resulted in about $24 million so far in investment in Minneapolis. And so, in the scheme of about $250,000 in damage, it's certainly doesn't cover it, but it's been able to provide some gap financing for a couple dozen pretty important projects, often closing that gap to make a rebuilding project get off the ground. 79% of those projects have been led by entrepreneurs or nonprofits led by people of color. My favorite example is the Coliseum project. So this building is over at 27th and Lake, so kind of kitty corner from the precinct building. And it's one of the remaining old multi-story brick buildings. And it was owned by a woman out in the burbs who looked at the level of damage, had an assessment done, and decided that it probably made sense to demolish the building and start over. So Seward Redesign again stepped in, took another look at the building, and determined that they would be able to renovate the building. So so Taylor in the center here, she's the project lead at Redesign, and she partnered with 3 African-American entrepreneurs, including the 2 women that you see here. Alicia Belton is an architect. The other woman is starting a co-working space for Black creatives. And they also partnered with Chris Montana of Denord Craft Spirits. That distillery had lost their space and is planning to open a restaurant in this building. So what's happening with this building is a really cool, innovative model where the nonprofit is taking on the bulk of the financial risk. They're bringing that development know-how to the table, and they brought together, I think, 14 different sources of financing, including banks, government, and foundations, to complete this renovation. And what's cool is over time, Redesign will reduce its ownership role completely, and those entrepreneurs that are their partners will step in gradually over time to full ownership of that building. And they are still looking for tenants too. And then the final project that I wanted to mention is a recent one that's come online. So across from Himalayan Restaurant in that same area was an O'Reilly Auto Parts that sat vacant over the last 3 years and was recently purchased by Copal, which is a Latino-led organization that is currently renting down the street. And they do voter engagement, advocacy, and social services type work. And so they have just purchased the site and began their capital campaign to raise funds to create the Latino Center for Community Engagement. And so this was one of those projects where we were able to utilize some of those We Love Lake Street funds and just put some initial funds in there to give confidence to their major funders who are now coming to the table. So in addition to the complex challenges of rebuilding the demolished buildings, really the biggest concern of our business community is how to bring customers back. That's been happening slowly since the pandemic, but people's shopping habits have just changed. And community safety and livability issues continue to be really forefront for a lot of residents, customers, and employees. And so it's become increasingly important for us to work with business owners, not just to improve their own marketing, but also we've been focused on really influencing the reputation and the feeling of the Lake Street Corridor as a whole. So we've worked with a lot of other partners to create 40 murals on the street, kind of concentrated in the Midtown area. And we have invested pretty heavily in working on PR, so working to get positive stories in the press about Lake Street's recovery. And what was pretty exciting is Mortensen Construction stepped in and dedicated about 3 full-time staff members and all of the funding to do 100 major renovations of storefronts. So at an average cost of about $50,000 per project. And so they just really were able to kind of flood the area with, improved storefront facades, sometimes dealing with deferred maintenance that went back decades, and also adding murals, working with local artists like these women, and so that's resulted in a really different feel, especially around the Chicagoan Lake and Bloomington and Lake area. So along with that, we've been very focused on events. We host some of our own events, but then also do a sponsorship program where we provide grants to a lot of small nonprofits and cultural organizations to do events that have brought, tens of thousands of folks back to the corridor. So community safety continues to be kind of the #1 thing that business owners are concerned about. Safety, but often that's kind of a code word for livability issues, more so than actual physical threats. But in any case, the police department continues to be down about 1/3 from where it should be. And so in that absence, kind of a patchwork of other kind of solutions and pilot projects have come online to try to help fill that gap. So we worked with council members this year in the city budgeting process to support and develop some new ideas. It still feels like a bit of a patchwork, but some of the things that we're excited about seeing over the coming year or two. First is a safety center that will be located in the 3rd precinct. There isn't a place anymore in the community where people can walk in, report a crime, get help. And so the city is currently negotiating space, which will hopefully bring a network of providers to the area, hopefully around Hiawatha and Lake. And so this will bring together behavioral health folks, case managers, and officers in some cases, to be able to work more directly with folks who need support in that area. We also were able to secure funding from the city to hire a Lake Street safety coordinator to try to coordinate between multiple agencies and provide more direct help to businesses with crime prevention. The city is going to pilot an ambassadors program. So if you've been downtown and noticed the guys in the neon green vests that are there to greet people, give directions, and also keep an eye on things and keep litter picked up. That is going to be piloted in our cultural districts, including Lake Street as well. It's not a lot of money, but it's a start to see if we can pilot some of those services in the community. The LEAD program provides case managers out on the street, and then transit safety coordinators is also a city attempt to add additional eyes and support at important transit nodes where we're having a lot of issues. And then finally, there's some funding for community-led pilot projects. So in the Phillips neighborhood, as well as in North Minneapolis, organizations who specialize in, anything like after-school programming or other kinds of violence prevention will be able to apply for small amounts of money to do pilot projects. So two major investments that will also have an influence on Lake Street over the coming years. Kmart, which is now finally demolished, and just this week the city released designs for how that site may look and how the reopening of Nicollet may look as well. And then the B line, the bus rapid transit line, is also going to be finished. The construction has pretty much finished up in Longfellow and is going to be finished up on the rest of the corridor this summer. So that's the end of my presentation on what's happening now on Lake Street, what's happened with recovery. I just want to mention a couple ways that the community can be involved. I think the most important thing is to shop local. And, you know, every dollar you spend, really, nowadays, you really got to think about, who do I want to support with this dollar? What business would I miss if it wasn't here next year? Because that's a reality. We also need folks to be cheerleaders. You know, there's a lot of negativity about our community now, and if you've had good experiences, let people know, invite friends to come, you know, and go out to dinner with you. We also need volunteers for anything from financial advising to corridor cleanups. And then finally, we're wrapping up some of our We Love Lake Street investments in terms of major investing in rebuilding properties, because the $12 million has been predominantly spent down, and by the end of this year it probably will be spent down. So as we're advocating to replenish those sources as much as possible from state government and foundations, it's some of that other work where donations can be particularly effective. So around some of that, the murals and placemaking and events, and having staff who are there to support entrepreneurs in Spanish and Somali. That's the kind of work where donations to the We Love Lake Street Fund or to a number of our other nonprofit partners who are really doing really important work in the corridor is also very important. So we've got about 15 minutes if anybody has any questions. And also, I want to invite, you know, other folks here, Hillary, Steve, Elizabeth, others, to feel free to jump in and answer as well.
Back to the lack of federal funding. Since this occurred during the height of COVID also, do you think the feds were more concerned on the Rescue Act than they were on Lake Street and other similar, and I know there was nothing like it in the country, but how do you assess why the lack of federal funding happened? And do you think that, that provided that we have an administration that believes in this stuff, that there is a potential for future federal funding?
It was during the Trump administration, and it was political, just like the first year in the state legislature. It was also very political. There was a lot of debate around the role of police and the police reform movement. And that really became kind of dominant in that political conversation and paralyzed funding. And I don't know, I'm trying to remember. I think that there was an appeal of that federal decision, and I can't remember if that happened while it was still the Trump administration or not. But also, you know, time moves on, and everyone's on to the next crisis now. And so, I don't know, maybe we also haven't concentrated efforts enough with those federal relationships. But there hasn't really been success at that level. But at the same time, you mentioned the COVID support, And that is absolutely what got people through, between PPP loans and other, federal and local government supports, as well as the We Love Lake Street program and a couple other funds that popped up. That combination of support when business was not happening is absolutely what got everyone through. I think, and it's amazing how few businesses left and how few ultimately closed permanently. It's really shocking to me because we didn't know what was going to happen. But we are now seeing those that did get through and still haven't been able to bring back the level of customers that they had before the pandemic. And they may have been hanging on by the skin of their teeth beforehand, and it hasn't gotten better. And so now we are starting to see some of those shocking closures of, well-known restaurants, and for example, and so the challenge isn't completely over.
Is there a plan to address all the empty storefronts at Hennepin and Lake in the Uptown area?
That's a great question, because when I said everybody came back, that was not the case in Uptown at all, right? It was the mom and pops that were committed, maybe didn't have another option, and came back. But there was definitely a corporate decision on the part of each of those national stores that is, they obviously closed tons of stores during COVID, and then there was this other risk calculation after the second set of civil unrest that happened in Uptown in 2021, where a number of those others closed. And I don't think there's a ton of hope for attracting them back in the next few years based on how they all seem to be shrinking nationally anyways. But what we are seeing is that there are a number of mom and pops that have actually opened in Uptown in Lynn Lake recently. There's been a lot of Black-owned restaurants and retailers that have opened up in Uptown, and they're not as visible because they're not taking up the big, H&M and Gap spaces. But there is going to have to be some kind of right sizing as we figure out over the next decade what Uptown's going to be next. But I do see some hope in the independent shops and restaurants that have opened there.
I have some questions about the safety center you mentioned. Is that going in the old 3rd Precinct building, or are they doing something else with that? And then my sort of second question about that same intersection is, are you looking at any opportunities for like green space or something? Like that Target parking lot, I feel like at Lake and Hiawatha is the most it's like the biggest, most unused parking lot I've ever seen. It just has like in the corner that big police camera, I think, and that's it. And I don't know what opportunities are there.
Yeah, good questions. So there's actually 2 safety centers in the works. And so the city has a vision that's developed over the last couple years that eventually every precinct will be more community facing, each precinct building. And so as the new precinct building is built over at about Minnehaha and 26th, that will include a version of a safety center. And that is expected to be online hopefully next year. But in the interim, there's been this plan developed for at least a temporary one that will be right on the street, kind of right where the action is. And I think it's still to be seen whether that will be temporary or permanent. That might depend on its effectiveness. And so there are these kind of 2 safety center concepts being developed at the same time. And then, so with the Target parking lot, there was a nonprofit, in any case, an affordable housing provider that developed and negotiated a plan to build on the lower part, the Lake Street part of the Target lot, but they weren't able to come to an agreement in the end with the trustees that, so there's, Yeah, there's a family, this group of trustees that owns that land under Target, and they weren't able to come to an agreement about the future of that site. But the ball has started rolling, the seed has been planted, and so we're hoping someday that does happen. I don't know about plans for green space there. But I don't know, I think that's probably farther off. But the Kmart site, has a lot of emphasis and quite a bit of land dedicated to green space, which can happen because the city, owns that land. I think that's probably a bigger lift over at the Target site.
I guess my question is, what are some worries you have in terms of moving forward from this kind of really, all these successes that you have shared amongst challenges?
Yeah, good question. I'm concerned about how shopping patterns have changed for everybody. It feels like we're a long way from developing a vision for Uptown around what its future will be. And so I think, our restaurants, I think, are doing okay. People still want to come out and have experiences. But that is threatened by the livability challenges that we have. But I'm pretty concerned about retail. There is a major transition happening there. And so I think, we continue to see a shift of a lot of our space from retail to services, for example. A place that maybe used to be a clothing shop and is now a business that provides elder care support, for example. So we've been fortunate that outside of Uptown, there's hardly any vacancy on Lake Street. Storefronts are full and there continues to be demand, but I think a lot of those businesses are hanging on by a thread. And so continuing to support those businesses, not only with access to capital when they need it, but also support so that they can be as efficient and sustainable as possible, so that those families running those businesses have time to go home and be with their kids and kind of live the life that they dreamed of. That continues to be, I think, a big challenge. And then with a number of the vacant lots that are in really prominent locations, it is a pretty uphill battle for those projects. The ones that are led by nonprofits have been able to bring a level of sophistication and relationships to foundations that they have been able to pull some of those pieces together. So I have confidence that NDC is going to be able to rebuild the corner of Lake in Chicago. And Redesign is going to be able to rebuild the US Bank site, and PPL is going to be able to rebuild along with Wells Fargo at Nicollet. But the ones where there isn't a nonprofit involved and it's just an entrepreneur trying to figure it out, it's really hard to make the numbers work, and it's the learning curve is very steep. And so, so I continue to be concerned for those folks that they can find a solution for their projects.
Mm-hmm. At 27th and Lake, the Oddfellows building where Nuevo Rodeo and Town Talk, and that site is obviously like a lot of that block. Yeah. I know that the McGizzy site, I did want to give a shout out to Holy Trinity Church for land banking that site. That was, they stepped up in so many big ways to support the community, and that was a really notable one, and I think a great model for other churches of ways that you can, they're hanging on to that site, and in order for McGizzy to move forward with purchasing a new site, they needed to sell that land, and so the church bought it from them so that it didn't go out of local control.
Yeah, that block, and then also the block at Chicago and Lake on the west side of the street are both blocks where there's multiple entrepreneurs that own fairly small lots, and it's really hard to get the numbers to work to rebuild on a small lot like that. And so I haven't heard a really recent update on the Oddfellows site. There is an entrepreneur who purchased it several months ago, and he has a vision around putting in his healthcare business on the first floor and housing up above. And he's getting support from Redesign, I think, to figure this out. And so there's a plan that's being developed, and I don't have a good sense right now of the feasibility of it.
If nobody else has a question, I'll come up with one. So there's a group of women that meet every month for breakfast, some of them in this room, Plymouth members. And can you recommend a good breakfast place? We usually go to Maria's on Franklin, and then we do wander off to other places. So is there a good breakfast place that we could try?
It's hard to beat the corn pancakes at Maria's. I was just thinking about those the other day.
I know.
I would check out Abby's.
Abby's?
Yeah, Abby was pictured in here briefly. I'm pretty sure they're open for breakfast. They're over towards Lynn Lake. Abby is Salvadoran and does pupusas and breakfast. Anybody else have suggestions?
I'll remember Abby's. Any more questions? It's almost time to quit, but any last minute? Here's a question online. I'll be darned. Well, it's in my email, I think. I'm not sure. It says here, did Allison speak about what is happening to where Gandhi Mahal and McGeesee were located? Just a minute. In the former Oddfellows building. There's more. I guess I have to check.
Yeah, that's the building we were just talking about on that block. Plus, Ruhel, the owner of Gandhi Mahal, has a really incredible vision for rebuilding on his site with more hydroponics and beehives and community spaces. It's a pretty big vision, and so he's still figuring out how to fund it.
And then there's another question from the same person. On the corner of Lake and Minnehaha, where there was a liquor store. Something about what, I guess she wants to know what's happening there.
I know Steve, the owner...
Here, I'll give this to you, because I want to make sure everybody hears the answer.
Well, it's Steve now.
Or whatever you have to say.
So I think Steve has passed on sort of the decision about that to his kids, and what I've heard is they're unwilling to move forward until a decision is made about the third precinct. They don't want to rebuild if they don't know what's happening across the street, because they're worried that if the precinct does go back there, it will jeopardize their building again. So that's what I've heard from them.
Is there news about the third precinct?
What was that?
Is there news about what's happening at the old precinct building?
Hillary, you might know better than I do where this is at. The city is engaging on, I think, some community engagement process, but I'm not sure when that is going to tee off. And then the city has also developed a proposal around bringing its voter services into the building as well.
They are moving forward with...
Okay.
I mean, they did select a new site to the north for the precinct.
Yeah.
So the precinct itself is not going to go back in that location. I guess they have sort of made that decision. But as far as the future of what's going to happen at that corner up where the third precinct building is still just like a hulking mess, they're moving very slowly to make a decision. And there was a big event there, which I wasn't able to attend last month or in late January, where a group presented a vision for it, but I don't know what the path to actually making that vision happen is. And it, you know, is a very community-based vision for the space. But the city would essentially have to like give that to them, and I don't think that's likely to happen right now.
And I guess it's time to end. So thank
Thank you.
Allison. And then I need to say that next week, of course, next week we have another program, and it is the beneficiaries of the Easter offering. E.J. Kelly from the Board of Outreach and more people, I think, will be here. So hope you come back. Thank you.